Welcome to Using Hadoop Analytics to Gain a Big Data Advantage, presented by Dell, Intel, Pentaho, and Cloudera. Thank you for joining us. I am John Zuanich, Marketing Specialist at Cloudera, and I have the privilege of introducing today's presenters. We have Ian Fyfe, VP Big Data Product Marketing at Pentaho, Jeff Stacey, Director of Go-to-Market Strategy, Channel, and Sales Development at Dell, and Jonathan Seidman, Solution Architect at Cloudera. This webinar will speak to why big data matters to your business, the business and technical challenges of big data solutions, how to leverage big data for a competitive advantage, the must-haves of an effective big data solution, and share real-world examples of Cloudera, Pentaho, Intel, and Dell big data solutions in action. All questions will be addressed at the end of the webinar. However, you may ask a question at any time via the questions panel on your GoToWebinar console. Without further ado, I would like to invite Jonathan Seidman to begin the presentation of Using Hadoop Analytics to Gain a Competitive Advantage.
Well, thanks, John, and thanks to all of you for joining us. So I think that we've all become aware in recent years of the massive growth in data that we've seen, but the full magnitude of that growth may not be evident. So according to a report released last year by IDC, an estimated 1.8 trillion gigabytes of data was generated in 2011. That's 1.8 zettabytes of data. And that's just going to continue to grow. Their estimate for the end of this decade is 35 zettabytes, so clearly massive growth in data that we're seeing. Just to make things more complicated, most of this data is unstructured or semi-structured data. So this slide is indicating that 90% of that data is unstructured data. I've seen different estimates, but suffice to say that a large percentage of that data is not neatly structured data. It's structured, unstructured, semi-structured data. So what's driving all this data growth? So there's a number of factors that are driving this growth. There are new data sources, there's social network data, there's sensor data, there's additional devices generating data. Mobile phones generate massive amounts of data, and there's more and more phones every day. It's also getting cheaper to store data, so that makes a lot more of it available, and that just adds to the growth. So if you could take advantage of all of that data, you could unlock numerous opportunities, and that goes across a range of industries and different use cases. So, companies can use that social data for doing things like sentiment analysis. All that sensor data can be used to do things like predict failure, reduce costs, and so on. This slide is really just kind of, I think, scratching the surface of how companies are using data to do things like lower costs, increase revenues, and so forth. So with that, I would like to turn things over to Ian, who's going to talk about some of the challenges that this big data presents.
Okay, thank you, Jonathan. Hello, everybody. This is Ian. So yeah, in terms of challenges, there's really three main challenges to think about when it comes to big data. The first one is probably a word you've heard of quite a bit, which is dealing with the high volume, velocity, and variety of data. And this is really, in some ways, become the de facto definition of what big data is. So volume kind of speaks for itself. Very large data volumes, often measured in terabytes, even into the petabyte range. Velocity is where the data is coming in very, very quickly. It could be at the sub-transactional level. So streaming in incredibly quickly, you need the ability to store that data as it streams in. And then ultimately, to get use out of that data, the ability to do analytics on that data as it is streaming in. And then, as Jonathan just touched on, in terms of variety, we are not dealing typically with big data just with plain old structured data, rows and columns. We're also dealing with unstructured or semi-structured data. So it could be anything from web logs to application logs to sensor data to video to photographs. So it's kind of non-traditional data types. So you need some way of processing, manipulating that unstructured or semi-structured data in a way that you can then ultimately do analytics on it. And this is one of the things that the growing big data platforms such as Hadoop are just great at doing that kind of processing. So yeah, it's all about driving that value across both structured and unstructured data, and if necessary, bringing that data together, enriching your big data with data from other data sources, and then the ability to very quickly adapt to context changes. So as your business changes, as new business questions arise from your end users, the ability to very easily go back and adapt, bring in new sources of data, add different adapt the schema effectively, which rows, which fields, which attributes you're going to be looking at and analyzing, and so on. So that's these are some of the challenges when it comes to big data, and in particular big data analytics. So if you look at current solutions out there, which I'm mostly talking about relational database solutions, they were really designed, back in the 70s, 80s, 90s for structured data. So again, rows, columns, numbers, strings, very kind of structured data. And they would, when you design a database schema and tables and so on, that's kind of designed to answer these very known questions. It does it very quickly and very efficiently, but you have to kind of think and plan up front. What are the kind of questions my end users are going to be asking, and kind of design your database schema, to respond to that. So it makes it pretty difficult to adapt. If you get new questions coming out of left field, it can take days, weeks, months even to go back and adapt that schema, bring in new data sources and so on. And it gets incredibly, I think the other thing about relational databases, they get incredibly expensive once you get big. Once you get up to the multi-terabyte, petabyte range. If you're talking about traditional commercial relational databases, you're talking very, very large sums of money to acquire and maintain those systems. So I think the other part of the challenge, if you look at how people are managing or collecting big data today, so down the bottom here, bottom left, you've got these different data sources that Jonathan talked about. Again, these very large data sources streaming in, and what's happening today is often that data is being stored in a very large kind of storage array or storage grid. Maybe it's being stored for compliance reasons, or or in the expectation that maybe one day you'll go and look at that data. But before the rise of big data platforms such as Hadoop, that's been incredibly difficult and expensive to do. So what's happening today is people are typically archiving that data onto tape. Really once it's on tape, the chances of going back and looking at their data are very, very slim. Well, the other thing people are doing over on the right-hand side is they're taking a slice of that data out of the storage array, taking a very small slice, maybe for a certain time frame, maybe for a certain geography or a certain set of customers, and they're moving that into a relational data store where it becomes much more practical to do interactive analysis, using traditional BI tools and so on. So that's kind of the situation today. So what we're going to be talking about in the rest of the webinar is how Hadoop really dramatically changes the situation, where instead of this just being a simple storage grid, you can now start doing real-time analytics against this data, where Hadoop is both managing that data and giving you this massively powerful distributed processing cluster to actually analyze that data as well. So I think Jonathan, it's back to you, I believe, or Jeff.
No, it is me.
Okay.
So thanks, Ian. So before we get into a deeper discussion of what Hadoop actually is, I'll just note that we've seen success with customers across a really broad range of industries. So this slide talks about a few of those industries and how Hadoop has provided value. So finance, the web, telecom, these are all industries that have unique challenges with data. But again, I think Hadoop has really proven its value with customers across a broad range of verticals, far beyond just what we show on this slide. So retail, healthcare, transportation, so on, have all found great success with Hadoop. Having access to these really large quantities of data, and just as importantly, having the ability to process all that data really enables new analyses. And I think what kind of ties these examples together is it's the ability to economically store and process all that data, but more than that, it's the ability to combine data from multiple data sources to enable new analyses. And I think this also shows that Hadoop is very flexible in its ability to help, basically any type of company that's struggling with data, Hadoop probably has a place.
And yeah, the Traveltainment, this is a very interesting company based out of the UK who provide a travel booking platform. This is actually used by other travel agents, including some of the very big ones, such as, what are they called? Sorry, I'm blanking on the name right now. Expedia in the UK. So these are, these other travel agents. They use this Traveltainment online booking system. And Traveltainment have actually chosen Pentaho, alongside Hadoop, to both process that data within the booking system, and then to do analytics. And really what it's done for them is provided for the very first time the ability for their customers to actually do their own self-service analytics on top of their Hadoop data. So they kind of set up the environment for them using Pentaho, and then using Pentaho they can go ahead and do their own visualizations, analytics, and analyze their own business, which is running on top of the Traveltainment platform. So this is one of many customers we have here at Pentaho who are running on top of Hadoop and other big data platforms, but a pretty interesting case study.
Hi, good morning, everyone. This is Chuck. I wanted to talk a little bit about what we've done at Dell to adopt Hadoop as a next-generation data platform. In that, specifically, there are a couple different cases where we're eating our own dog food, so to speak. In that, Dell has made a major deployment around business intelligence using big data technologies. Hadoop, in particular, has shown vast savings for us to be able to allow us to tap into much larger data sources at a fraction of the cost. The reduced cost that we're seeing, not just around the $35 million mark, also represents the possibility for us to increase shipment time by nearly a third and to have deep impacts on product quality, not just for the very large companies to be able to consume, but also to be able to relate to many customers who are even in smaller arenas. If we could advance to the next slide. SecureWorks was an acquisition that we picked up over the last year or so here that has been able to greatly reduce the cost of their data storage. For those of you who are not familiar with SecureWorks, not just from a general information management strategy, Hadoop has had deep impacts on their ability to be able to store threat data. And if you're not familiar with SecureWorks, they are a company that, as a service, can allow you to monitor threats in your existing infrastructure, not just as a signature, but to actually be able to monitor your enterprise for ongoing real-time threats. And as you'd expect, this is a different model that requires vast amounts of data to be able to be collected, to be able to be acted upon. And since coming aboard at Dell, SecureWorks has been able to not only vastly reduce their cost for storing this information, but to be able to scale up to a much larger level. I think to pick up the pace a little bit and move forward, I don't know if we can advance to the next slide here. We can go to slide 16. I wanted to talk briefly about those two use cases are kind of interesting in that we're seeing new roadmaps using Hadoop and big data architectures that were never really possible before. Dell being able to consolidate a much larger data storage, a larger ETL area for data warehousing and BI, and larger compute areas in the case of SecureWorks. We're seeing really some great possibilities in three new roadmaps in particular for clients to be able to not only create big data storage, which for many of our clients to be able to build much larger data stores at a fraction of the cost and to be able to scale them anywhere from 4 nodes up to 4,000 is creating some very interesting possibilities for us to be able to also set many of our customers up for other roadmaps to complement their ETL and data warehousing strategy. Many of our clients also intend to be able to use Hadoop as a complementary data store to traditional data warehousing and BI. I think contrary to a lot of the hype and the confusion on the market, Hadoop in of itself is actually very complementary to traditional data warehousing and BI architectures, and we'll talk about that in a little more length. But thirdly, in many cases, for advanced users, we've been able to partner with Pentaho, Cloudera, to be able to create next-generation analytic platforms where advanced users can explore and analyze data right where it lies. So we've really got three new possibilities for our customers, and we'll talk a little about why is Hadoop emerging so quickly? Why is it such a popular data platform? In a sense, these are really some of the three key reasons. The ability to cost-effectively grow your data, to be able to pre-process it and create staging area for data warehousing, BI, and other systems. And thirdly, to also to be able to analyze and process data right where it lays. And I think we'll turn it over to John for a second to talk about why Hadoop.
Yeah, so we've we've talked about this explosion of data. We've talked about the challenges of managing that data with existing solutions. So I'd like to talk specifically about how Hadoop helps to meet these challenges. So Hadoop is basically, it's an open source platform. It was architected to store and process really massive amounts of data, typically in the terabytes to petabytes. And it does this, and as we've already noted, it does this very economically. And just as importantly, I think, reliably. So there's two primary components to Hadoop. There's the Hadoop distributed file system, which is commonly referred to as HDFS, and that's what provides the storage component. So HDFS basically allows you to create a file system which spans a cluster of servers. And a typical deployment might start out with tens of nodes, might go up to hundreds or even thousands of nodes in larger deployments. And it allows you to store any type of data. And one of the really critical aspects of this is that it allows you to store raw data as it is. And as Ian was kind of referring to earlier, it allows you to process that data without placing any constraints on that data. Applications are free to process that data in any way they need, and it makes it very adaptable to changes to the data. The MapReduce framework is what provides the processing component of Hadoop. It allows developers to write applications that easily and efficiently process all of the data that you have stored in HDFS. And again, I'll emphasize that Hadoop does this economically by using commodity hardware. And we'll talk a little bit more about this, but I guess it should be emphasized that commodity hardware doesn't mean cheap hardware. It just means that you don't necessarily need enterprise-grade hardware to run Hadoop. So the really great thing about Hadoop, or one of the really great things about Hadoop, is it allows you to keep all of your data online for processing. And that really kind of opens up new analyses that weren't really practical before. Before joining Cloudera, I was at Orbitz Worldwide, which is, runs Orbitz.com, which is one of the most heavily trafficked sites on the internet. And we brought in Hadoop to help us deal with our data problems. And one of the things that really kind of continually amazed me was that once we had all this data online, people started finding new uses for the data that I hadn't even imagined before. So it's really kind of amazing how once you have the data available and online for processing, people find all kinds of uses for it that you probably wouldn't have even imagined before. So the other really critical aspect, or at least another critical aspect of Hadoop, is that it's architected to work around failure. So both in the storage and processing layers. And so this is also really important. So digging a little bit deeper into HDFS. So again, HDFS doesn't just give you the ability to store large quantities of data, but it also allows you to do it reliably. And one of the ways it does this is it splits incoming data into blocks, which is 64 megabyte blocks by default, but that's configurable. It then creates multiple copies of each block and then spreads those blocks across the cluster. And it makes sure that each block is copied to a separate node in the cluster. And if you have a multiple rack deployment, which is fairly common nowadays, it'll even spread those blocks across racks. So that means that you could lose an entire rack and still have an intact copy of your data. So it very reliably stores all of your data, makes sure that you don't lose any data. And it's also, as I said earlier, it's designed to route around failures. So in a large cluster, even a not so large cluster, it's very common to have failures. So either disk failures or server failures or failures of processes. So HDFS is designed to route around these failures. So if you were to say lose a server, HDFS would move processing to another node that has an intact copy of the data. And then it'll work to re-replicate the data. And so then the other component of Hadoop is MapReduce. And without getting into too much detail on MapReduce, I'll just note that it simplifies implementation of parallel processing in the data and really shields developers from having to worry about low-level details of distributed processing. So that really allows developers to focus on solving problems rather than having to manage low-level system details. And just like HDFS, it's also resilient to failure by routing around failures in the system. So Hadoop is pretty awesome, but it does present some challenges in terms of things like management and deployment and development. So we're going to, in this webinar, we're talking about how Cloudera, Dell, and Pentaho provide solutions to ease these challenges. So I also want to talk about there's a really rich ecosystem of open source tools that have grown up around Hadoop. So things like Apache Hive and Pig provide higher level abstractions on Hadoop that ease processing, make analysis on Hadoop more accessible to users, and speed up the process of developing analysis. There are tools to get data in and out of Hadoop. Flume and Scoop provide abilities to move data out of Hadoop, into Hadoop, out of Hadoop, and in between things like relational databases and data warehouses and Hadoop. There's also another popular tool is HBase, which is basically a NoSQL system that provides low latency access to data in HDFS. And by itself, HDFS is a batch processing system. So HBase kind of opens up a whole new range of applications on Hadoop. So these tools provide a lot of power and value to Hadoop on top of the base distribution, but there's still really a need for higher level tools to make Hadoop more accessible and make development more efficient. And so this is where our partners like Pentaho come into the picture. So this slide is showing a high-level view of a very typical production deployment of Hadoop. And so I guess a couple of things that I'd like to point out here is that Hadoop is generally deployed as part of an existing data infrastructure. So as Jeff was saying earlier, Hadoop isn't going to really replace your existing databases and data warehouses, but it will really complement and extend them. And then the other thing that I'd like to point out here is that you can use your existing tools with Hadoop. Here, this again is where our partners like Pentaho provide a lot of value, because a lot of companies don't want to have to buy new tools to work with Hadoop or the new systems. They want to be able to use the same tools across multiple data sources. So that's really where a lot of value comes in. And so with that, I'm going to turn things over to Jeff and Ian to talk more about the Cloudera, Dell, Pentaho solution.
You bet. Thanks a lot, Jonathan. And I just wanted to, touch on and recap on what Jonathan was talking about and talk a little about why we chose Cloudera at Dell. Why have we gone to market with Cloudera, and actually why have we innovated with Cloudera? Cloudera has really been a no-brainer in terms of a partner for us, because not only have they been a gorilla in the market, but they provide a roadmap for a customer to go from start to finish, from experiment, early development, from what I would call proof of concept, proof of technology, into dozens of nodes, into deployment for what I would call a proof of value lab, and well into production once they found the value of being able to take big data analytics out into the enterprise. Secondly, the Cloudera's commitment to be a contributor into the ecosystem guarantees that not only will they be in leadership position, but they are incorporating the best practices of our customers back into the community. Thirdly, we really recognize the pains that customers have when deploying new technology is not just around the deployment itself, but also in the management, as you would with any large-scale data platform, to be able to deploy and to be able to provision. And we've not only partnered with Cloudera in terms of being able to serve our customers' needs and to be able to go to market, but we have deep innovation in creating reference configurations, bringing our best practices together as a company to be able to give you a deployment that reduces your time, cost, and risk. And the rationale behind this has been very obvious for the initial customers, but not just to be able to get started, but also because our customers who may not be a Yahoo or a LinkedIn and may not have a critical mass of Hadoop talent. They want to know not just the best practices, but they want to deploy on balanced configurations that are similar to what the big boys are using, so that they can have that predictable result. And on the note of deployment, if we can step forward here one slide, Dell has put innovation into our own software contribution to this growth path and this roadmap in what we call Crowbar. Crowbar is a deployment framework that allows you to provision, to deploy, provision, and reprovision on demand anywhere from 6 to thousands of nodes if you wanted to take it into that custom basis. We have customers who are building configurations, hundreds of units sometimes, in a fraction of the cost, and can deploy Hadoop in a matter of hours that would normally take days, and considerable expertise from their staff. And what I think is quite significant about this is this allows us to provision workloads specifically, not just generic grids for your consumption, but workloads that will be appropriate for Pentaho to be able to process data, to ingest data, and to be able to optimize for analytics, and even pre-process for data warehousing and BI environments. And we'll touch on that just a little bit later. I wanted to talk also in terms of not just best practices, but in terms of what are the bricks and the building blocks that are being used in production, that are being used by the big boys. Dell can't always talk about the exact names of our clients, but it is somewhat going without saying in the industry that Dell has been a gorilla in terms of providing not just the nodes that are top of popularity for Hadoop deployment, but we have continued to innovate and listen to our customers. In fact, we've been under the crack of the whip of hundreds of customers who have deployed tens of thousands of nodes as the gorilla in the space to listen to what our customers really want. And we have some very exciting releases to be able to come out right now. We have what was known as our Zeus project, our C8000, which is creating the possibility of not only unprecedented density of CPU, RAM, and spindle density, which is really, really crucial for customers who are looking to do analytics, who want to be able to do long sequential read-writes. But this is also based on the architecture that we have been perfecting in our 720XD or 2100 series and many of the popular nodes that the big boys are wanting to be deploying on. What's really nice about the work we've done with Cloudera to be able to optimize these configurations is that you know that you can start on a winning configuration that has been proven out by the big boys, and you can finish on a node configuration that is going to give you the most for your hardware and software dollar. And in particular, in the case of our C8000, highly optimized for data warehousing, BI, and analytic workloads, especially in the case of Hadoop big data analytic deployments. So I think, moving on to the next slide, why did we choose Pentaho? Well, what I think is there's really three major keys that I think really sets Pentaho apart. First, we've always loved Pentaho's commitment to the open source community, very much in the spirit of the Hadoop community. Customers want openness, and they want to see innovation, and they want to see that Pentaho's community is tightly intertwined with their interests into openness, and also is going to be very well aligned within the Hadoop community. A couple of really key differentiators for Pentaho is not only is it a very competitive data warehousing and BI platform that integrates to Hadoop, this creates the possibility of doing data exploration natively inside of Hadoop long before you pre-process it, ETL, and move it into a data warehousing and BI environment. This allows advanced users, analysts, data scientists, whatever you like to call them, to be able to explore data, find early outliers, find segments that they are interested in, and push that out to data warehousing and BI environments for mere mortal type BI users to be able to consume. But I think the third key, which is Pentaho is the only vendor who can natively use the power and the horsepower of MapReduce. You can take your anywhere from 4,000 to 4,000 units of your Hadoop deployment, ingest large amounts of heterogeneous, semi-structured, raw data, and use the horsepower of Hadoop to transform it to be able to find the segments and the sets of information that you may want to analyze there natively inside of Hadoop using Pentaho, or you may want to push it out to a data warehousing and BI environment. And this is really quite revolutionary in our minds, because the platforms that customers have used historically for ETL can be very proprietary, very expensive, and very difficult to balance and tune, and they're just not dynamic. They really need to be able to use the flexibility and the elastic nature of Hadoop to take latent cycles, to be able to use that type of horsepower to pre-process data before it moves onto the data warehousing platform, because traditional ETL staging areas or moving that workload onto the data warehousing and BI platform is very expensive real estate to manage. I wanted to touch briefly on what's probably actually really a fourth differentiator for Pentaho is Pentaho's ETL capability, in fact, their data integration capability, their ability to execute natively inside of MapReduce is more than just the ability to write ETL code. In fact, Pentaho not only offers a visual studio for managing your data integration and your data flow, but it allows you to set up jobs to run natively within the MapReduce framework, where most customers would be spending deep cycles in writing custom PIG and related C++ code to run natively within MapReduce. And this is really quite a significant advancement, not just because it speeds development, but to be able to configure and reuse your investments and your innovation in structuring data, pre-processing your data, and keeping that workload and moving workloads between your data warehousing and Hadoop environment. I think last but not least, I wanted to kind of close the loop on what I was touching on earlier. We see customers make three major investments on their roadmap. Many, many, many customers right now, in fact, depending on which analyst you talk to, nearly every Global 1000 company and a lot of mid-market and SMB companies are embarking on their first Hadoop proof of concept and proof of technology. Dell's worked very hard with Cloudera to be able to make that digestible for you to be able to get started with as few as 6 nodes if you wanted to, really in the 5-digit investment range, to be able to get started to find out, is Hadoop a platform that can allow me to access new data that was never accessible before, perhaps at a fraction of the cost, and give me a roadmap that if I want to move into stage 2, where I want to build out a pool of social data to identify who are my most ripe customers, or in finance, customers want to look for indicators of fraud, and we have telecom customers who want to be able to analyze how do I actually optimize my traffic. Being able to move from an initial proof of concept, proof of technology, into what we would call a proof of value environment and build that lab using a data scientist is now very much more achievable with the reference configurations that Dell and Cloudera have been able to put together. I think the jump from proof of value into production is really greatly accelerated by our partner Pentaho in particular, in that they're giving us the ability to explore, pre-process, visualize, and justify a much larger scale investment for customers to be able to make this data tangible and to figure out what data sets they would like to bring out to their data warehousing and BI audience that will be valuable to them without requiring all users to dive natively into raw Hadoop data. I just kind of wanted to wrap with, we're looking forward to starting a conversation with our customers, because there really is the possibility today for customers to get started at crawl, walk, and run strategies. And we're glad to be here with our partners talking about how we're able to make that a lot more possible.
Jeff, I can just wrap up on this final slide. So remember at the beginning I talked about some of the challenges around big data analytics, and I think, from what you've seen in the webinar, really the combined solution is a great solution for solving those challenges around, cost effectively managing that huge volume and variety and velocity of data, using Hadoop running on the Dell hardware, which is optimized for Hadoop. Using Cloudera running on Dell hardware, and that can analyze both structured and unstructured data, and very, very quick to change, particularly with Pentaho, with the visual development interfaces, no coding required, makes it much, much faster to react to changes in the business and new questions, the ability through that visual point of interface to bring in new data sources or enrich data from external sources and so on. So that's the end-to-end solution. So I think at this point we're going to switch to Q&A. So if you have any questions, please enter them into the Q&A panel in GoToMeeting. I've had a few questions come in throughout the meeting, so let's just go to those first of all. I think, Jeff, maybe I can talk to this one too. The first one is around, so are these different solutions from Dell and Pentaho and Cloudera, are they certified and tested together? And certainly for the Pentaho piece, yeah, we're fully certified on Cloudera. We've been through the full certification process with Cloudera CDH4, and also through the Dell certification labs. And Jeff, do you want to add anything to that?
No, I think that's really it. Every one of these solutions I described are in market today and have been proven out and have been run through our reference configurations and certification.
Okay. Another question, actually, this will be for you, Jeff. So, somebody's asking, so how do they find out more about the combined solution? Who do they talk to?
I think they've actually got either an email alias or they can talk to their local Dell representative who can work through our DCS organization. Probably the key word is have your local Dell rep get a hold of their DCS representative to talk to them about the Dell Cloudera solution. Okay, good.
And Jonathan, this one's about Cloudera. So, obviously there's many different distributions of Hadoop out there, including Apache Hadoop and distros from other commercial vendors. So, tell us a little bit more about why people should use Cloudera.
Well, sure. So Cloudera, what we do is with our CDH distribution, we take all of the different components, all the different open source components, the core components that we were talking about earlier. We bundle them together. We make sure that they all work together. We have a number of engineers. We have a number of folks on our testing team. We have very large teams that are working to make sure that all the pieces fit together. Our engineers are making continual contributions to the Hadoop ecosystem, so both to core Hadoop and the various projects that are around Hadoop, so those open source projects that we were talking about earlier. And in fact, a lot of those projects actually came out of Cloudera. So we have, just from my perspective, we have a lot of the top folks in the Hadoop community who are working very hard to make sure that that Hadoop in general is better. So not just our distribution, but the project as a whole, it is better and continues to improve. We're adding new features all the time. There's high availability is available now, federation. So Cloudera is making, I think, great contributions to the Hadoop community, as well as providing a very solid distribution for Hadoop. And then, of course, we also offer our enterprise solutions on top of that base distribution. So we offer we talked about one of the issues with Hadoop now is manageability. So there really aren't a lot of tools around managing. So we have our Cloudera Manager project, which really does a great job of addressing that. So management, monitoring, and so forth, and makes Hadoop really much easier to deploy and manage. And then, of course, we have our services offerings. So, we can come and help you, figure out if, where Hadoop fits, what are good use cases, how to actually get it deployed, how to use it. We have training. So we have really, it's not just CDH. We have a full range of services for companies that are trying to get started with these technologies.
Okay, thanks, Jonathan. So there's a question here which we should have addressed up front, but will this presentation today be recorded and made available? John, are you online to answer that? Otherwise, I can.
Yes, so the recording will be available on Cloudera.com shortly, and all attendees will be receiving an email very shortly with a link to the recorded resource.
And the same goes for the Pentaho side, and I assume the Dell side as well. It'll be available on our websites, the recording and the slides. Okay, Jonathan, they've got more Hadoop questions coming in. So a couple of you were talking about the way HDFS does data storage. The question is the estimate always 3 times the base storage, and does that mean you need to have more space for infrastructure?
Well, yeah, so that is a very good point. And so the default replication for Hadoop is 3-way. So that does mean that you're essentially, you need basically 3 times the storage to store a file. So if you have a 100 gigabyte file, you really need to consider 300 gigabytes, although it's not quite that simple. There's a little overhead there too. But yes, so the replication does need to be taken into account, and it does increase the storage needs. Fortunately, with Hadoop, though, it's designed to make the storage very economical. So, even if you're storing, terabytes or up to petabytes of data, it's still going to be much cheaper than other storage solutions, much cheaper. So, going back to I mentioned that I came from Orbitz. So Orbitz now has essentially a petabyte of data in their Hadoop cluster. And there's just no way that would have been economical any other way than with Hadoop. It would have been impossible.
And of course, you're duplicating the data for good reason, for redundancy, right? When you get to this very large scale, hardware is going to fail in a cluster. So that's why.
Yes, exactly.
Yeah.
Right, exactly. So you're providing reliability by creating the copies of the data, as well as making processing more efficient, since the more copies of the data you have, the closer you can get to the data for processing. And data locality is also another very important aspect of Hadoop.
Okay, Jeff, a quick question here about Dell. So somebody's asking, so why, what's so cool about the Dell C1008 hardware as it relates to Hadoop?
Yes, I think I probably stole a little bit of the thunder earlier, but taking the innovation and the density, particularly the C-Series was designed to give you everything you need for Hadoop and cloud deployments, and nothing you don't. What's particularly interesting about C8000 is just the sheer mass and capacity of what you're going to be able to do in terms of the density of drives. And for environments like this where you're looking to do long sequential read-writes, spindles are king. And there can be very different use cases inside of in Hadoop. 3 of the major use cases we see are large-scale compute configurations, which tend to be very CPU and tend to be very RAM heavy. We see large-scale storage where people want large drive support, which C8000 creates some very interesting possibilities in terms of 3-terabyte drives and otherwise. But also we have configurations that will allow more spindles than were ever really possible before, so the customers can have the smooth, long, sequential read-write capability that are very valuable to what we would call database or analytic workloads. So I think this is there's quite a bit of innovation that's gone into customizing and optimizing this configuration. It's a deeper topic than we probably have here, and we're actually going to be conducting webinars as for what are the workloads and what has been so great around the C8000. We'd encourage you to either reach out to your Dell rep or take a look at some of our ongoing webinars announcing Zeus's launch.
Okay. Next question is actually for me. It's a Pentaho question. So somebody's asking the visual development interface I talked about. Is that available with the community version as well? And the answer is yes. We actually open sourced all of our Hadoop capabilities at the beginning of this year. So that full visual development interface is available with the Pentaho Community Edition, as well as fully supported in our Enterprise Edition, with Hadoop and other NoSQL databases. Speaking of that, there's a question here. I think, again, Jonathan, is going to be for you. Somebody wants to know what's the difference between the Cloudera Hadoop platform and other MPP type platforms such as Teradata Asta.
Wow. Well, so that's probably a difficult question to really get into in this short period of time.
Okay.
But
All right.
But it should. I think the important point to note is that, as we were saying earlier, Hadoop is not a replacement for things like your MPP databases. Most of our customers are using Hadoop alongside their Teradata or Netezza or whatever their data infrastructure is and data warehouse.
Okay. Another question. Go ahead.
And we actually are planning to have webinars to drill down deep into this, because this is a topic that's very near and dear to our heart at Dell as well. We want to talk about why we are building optimized workloads for MPP versus analytic Hadoop platforms, and where each of these workloads shift between the two, and what's being done to integrate these two platforms.
Okay. Another question here. Kind of an architectural question here. Somebody's asking, do we recommend using Hadoop and Pentaho together for doing real-time analysis, and how to do that? I can talk to that, and I think the combined solution of Hadoop and Pentaho is a great solution for real-time analysis. I think as everyone recognizes, Hadoop is more of a batch processing platform. It's awesome at storing huge amounts of data and processing that data. But when you come to doing real-time analysis, it's really not. It was never designed for doing that. It's really not optimized for that. And this is where the combination of using Pentaho with our visual interface, but very, very easily and quickly taking a slice of data out of Hadoop and moving it into a data store, which is more suitable for real-time analysis, relational database of your choice. So that can be done literally in minutes, instead of having to write a bunch of code in order to make that happen. By using Pentaho on top of Hadoop, that becomes incredibly easy to do. And if either of you had anything else to add to that. Okay, Jonathan, this is a pretty technical question, but are there any ACID concerns around Hadoop, and how are they overcome?
Yeah, and so that kind of goes back to, Hadoop should not be viewed as a database. By itself, Hadoop is really it's a storage system. It's basically a really big file system. So you really shouldn't try to place your relational database concepts on Hadoop, because as it is, it's again not a database, and it doesn't replace things like a relational database. There are interfaces that put more of a database type of interface on Hadoop, but yeah, by itself, Hadoop isn't really. It's not offering you transactions. It's not offering it. It's definitely not ACID in any respect.
Okay, I'd like to add a couple of comments to that as well, if I could, Ian. Go ahead. Really what people are calling big data, people get too hung up on just the big side of the data, the volume of the data. The velocity at which it's coming, but also the variety is creating an entirely new set of data. And it might be better if people started calling it new data or extreme data, as Gartner calls it. But what's particularly interesting about this is transactional data has been growing at a pretty healthy clip. But this 80% of data that you hear Gartner talk about as being unstructured data isn't really usually totally unstructured. It is interaction data that we're seeing from social interactions, from clickstream, from mobile, that can now be correlated to transactional data. So looking at Hadoop as an alternative for a transactional data platform isn't usually the biggest value proposition people are seeing. It's the possibility of leveraging this additional 80% of data that is exploding and potentially being able to correlate that back to transactional data to get a broader view of a customer or a broader view of what's happening with the sentiment of your product is really where customers are getting the most excited right now. And I think that's an important thing to keep in mind, is this is now creating the possibility of mapping data that was very explicit in the OLTP era with implicit data that is moving very quickly to create insights that was never possible before.
Okay, thanks, Jeff. So we're actually starting to get towards the top of the hour, so I think we've probably just got time for one or two more questions. So somebody here is asking about, so why Pentaho? There's plenty of other data integration and BI tools out there that talk about Hadoop integration. Why Pentaho instead of those? And without getting into specific vendors and so on, I think one of the key things is the fact that we do offer that complete end-to-end solution. Everything from ETL, the data integration piece for ingesting data, manipulating that data inside of Hadoop, making it ready for analysis, and then obviously on the front end, all of our very cool visualization and interactive analysis. All in a kind of seamless end-to-end solution with a single install, from a single vendor. And we talked about some of the stuff during the presentation, like our data integration engine. It's literally the only data integration engine on the planet that can run across the Hadoop cluster as a MapReduce job. Most other DI tools either run outside of Hadoop, they kind of read and write to Hadoop, or they code generate. They generate a pig script, for example. And sure, that that technically is running inside of Hadoop, but it's pretty inefficient. When you have machine-generated pig scripts, they tend to run pretty inefficiently. So, and then as you say, on the front end, we've also got native integration with pretty much every way you can talk to Hadoop, whether that's through the Hadoop file system, whether it's through Hive, or natively through MapReduce. We can connect in any of those ways. So we've been pretty much doing this longer than anyone else since about mid-2010. So we're kind of further along the journey, and we've got that much deeper, more mature integration with Hadoop than any other BI vendor out there. So, okay. Well, I wanted to thank everybody for attending today's webinar. We hope you found it interesting and useful. And if you want to get more information, please contact any of the people on the screen right now. So Jonathan Seidman from Cloudera, myself at Pentaho, or Jeff Stacey at Dell. So thank you very much, Jonathan and Jeff. And we'll look forward to seeing everybody here on a future event with Pentaho, Cloudera, and Dell. Thank you.